Hi, I'm Jaclyn.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
We are here after talking for quite a long time. I just want to say that, first of all, if you do not have a best friend in your life that will FaceTime you all night, every night while your husband is out of town, what are you doing? Because this is now, I don't know, 4 nights in a row that I have FaceTimed with Courtney. And each night we have talked for a long amount of
And
time.
still, we talked an hour before we started recording this podcast.
Yes. So I'm just like, I don't know how we have so much to say, but we always do. I drank an entire Truly since we hopped on this call to start recording and didn't even start recording.
Most of my rum and coke is gone. I should have had Kevin have one waiting in the wings.
Yeah, he should have. Linus. Yes.
Any How I Met Your Mother fans out there.
I wish this was the video episode because we were perfectly in sync with our handshake with our Linus. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with all that, but
I was just thinking, should this be the video episode because it's the first of the month?
I mean, I guess it could be. I'm looking like trash, but
No, we'll do it next week because
cool.
I look like a tomato. That alcohol went straight to my face. So we'll do it next week.
For some reason, I didn't understand what you meant by tomato until you said that. And I was like, what a weird description.
My face is just really red and it's dark outside. So the lighting is just accentuating the redness on my face.
Yeah.
Guys, we're just in a silly, goofy mood.
Totally what you want for a crime podcast.
We'll get serious when it comes to. Don't worry. We'll put on our professional faces.
Don't start your YouTube comments already because we giggled on a podcast about crime before we got to the actual crime because...
Man, guys, YouTube hates us. But, it's okay.
I did
haters gonna hate.
Yeah, one of the other true crime TikTok people that we've interacted with was like, you should just turn off the YouTube comments. And I'm like, we probably should. But I want to interact with you all about what you think about cases.
Yeah,
and that's but most of y'all are mean. So I don't know.
At least we don't get too many. At least we're not like My Favorite Murder famous, because then I would 100% be limiting comments or turning. Can you limit comments on YouTube? Can you make it where only your subscribers can comment? Because that would be an excellent idea. You can only comment if you're subscribing to us. So then we don't get the random haters. And if they want to hate, they have to follow us.
That's a good point. We should look into that.
We're going to look into that, guys. Real-time planning. We keep doing this. In the Patreon episode last week or 2 weeks ago, or last month, I guess at this point, we just planned our entire podcast and you had to sit there and listen to it. If you're a Patreon.
On our Patreon episode, we just planned the rest of the year basically of our what we're doing and some new ideas. And because clearly we don't have any other time to talk about this after we've already FaceTimed for 6.5 hours this week. We have no other time in the world to discuss this. So we'll just do it here live on the pod. So you have to listen to everything.
Yeah. But I'm going to look into that. Hopefully I remember it. I'll remember it when I'm editing. If not, and I'll go back and see what I can do. So we don't have many updates. We do have one. So Vanessa Bryant, who is Kobe Bryant's wife, she was awarded $16 million in damages due to leaked photos of the crash site. So for some ungodly reason, people leaked the pictures of the crash site. And I cannot even imagine how hard that was for her to have to see those pictures of where her husband and her child died. So I'm very glad she was awarded that money.
Yeah, what could possibly possess you to do that? I just don't understand.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. So, but
yeah, definitely glad that that went in her favor. So our sources for today's episode are the book. Just kind of got ahead of myself there.
I only read one.
Well, it was like our sources are, and then it felt weird listing a single Abandoned Prayers, an incredible true story of murder, obsession, and Amish secrets by Greg Olson. Also an article from Cinemaholic and Murderpedia. Also, my dog is in this room and is snoring. So if it cuts in because Courtney can't cut it out, I apologize for that, but she's really cute. So hopefully you don't mind. Okay. On December 24th, 1985, Chuck Cleveland left his house to go get a haircut in Chester, which is pretty close to the Nebraska-Kansas state line. So it was around 10 a.m., and he took a farm road detour to see if there were any peasants around. So peasants are just like a type of bird that he was trying to get for his Christmas dinner. So he saw something sticking out from a field and pulled over where he found a dead body. It did appear to be a little girl dressed in a blue one-piece blanket sleeper, and it looked like her hand had been placed over her heart. So he communicated with his two-way radio in his truck to his truck stop fleet and told the bookkeeper that he thinks he found a dead body. He didn't want to give the exact location because he knew many people had police scanners and the scene would like immediately be trampled by a lot of people. So he did meet the sheriff at a different location.
Which I thought was pretty smart to have like the wherewithal to be like,
yeah,
if I say this over the scanner, everyone's going to be here and we can't have everyone being here.
Any evidence that's left is going to be gone because people are just going to be all over it. So Thayer County Sheriff Department hadn't seen a murder in over a decade. So an officer met Chuck and Chuck took him to the site. The soft tissues on the nose and mouth of the body had been scraped away and there was exposed nasal cartilage. The left hand was actually like over the abdomen and not the heart as they originally thought, and the right hand was tucked underneath her body. There were bruises along her neck and her forehead, so the officer wondered if she had been beaten and strangled, but like she was also carefully placed, so just kind of very odd. The officer immediately called for help from the state because they hadn't handled a murder in such a long time, which again, good for you because we do not see this often. So when we do, we like to praise it.
If you were not, they were like, we can't do this. We need help.
This is out of our element. If you're not equipped to handle something, it is okay to ask for help. That goes for all areas of your life, but especially y'all police, we looking at you. So the blue sleeper seemed odd because it didn't really seem to fit like what her age was. So they were wondering like, does this child have some kind of disability? Like, was she abused? Like, just it's like too young for her. Like, didn't really make sense. The blue sleeper was also in pristine condition, like it had never been worn before. So the Nebraska State Patrol officers came out and surveyed the scene, and while documenting the scene, an investigator unzipped the blue sleeper to see if there were any clues of abuse or to find out, like, you know, anything that they can, and they discovered this child was actually a boy, so it was not a girl like they thought. The child was also not wearing any underwear, which they found really weird because most children wear underwear underneath their pajamas, and they didn't find a lot of evidence around the scene. They did find a gray sneaker brand t-shirt, which was size 34-36, with Panther Wrestling written on it about 3/8 of a mile from the scene. A pair of boxers were also found about a half-mile away. So in the autopsy room, they discovered that the little boy's hair was blonde and he had a lot of freckles. So they estimated the boy was around 10 years old. He was about 51.5 inches tall and weighed around 50 to 60 pounds. He did appear to be in good health. He was well nourished, had clearly been taken care of. Unfortunately, there was some animal activity on the body. And the only defining marks on him were a circular scar the size of a cigarette burn on the boy's right forearm and a small tan birthmark on the inside of his right calf. There was no damage to the skull. So it was likely from the cold weather that like the skin discoloration had occurred on the face. The hyoid bone was intact, but apparently that's more flexible in children. So it's not like an exact science of whether or not children have been strangled with that being intact. They did believe it was unlikely now that he had been beaten or strangled. They believed he died around 36 hours before he was found, but they could not determine the cause of death. They thought it was possible that it was rapid hypothermia, but there was no way to tell for sure. And when test results came back, no semen was found from the swabs. His blood was type A with a positive Rh factor, and the hairs on the sleeper and t-shirt had not come from the boy. So with very few leads, investigators created flyers to pass around Nebraska to try and identify the boy. So in the first week from the flyers, 150 leads came in, but none of them really panned out. So now they were just relying on trace evidence analysis. And on January 31st, the results came back and they found blue paint fragments as well as red, white, and blue cotton fibers from the fingernail scrapings. The sleeper also showed paint fragments. Only one soil grain was recovered from the sleeper's rubber feet, which proved that the child had been carried to the site and had not walked there, because obviously there would be dirt all over those feet if the child had walked there, especially like those grippy, like rubber feet, that are on the bottom of sleepers. Like they're going to pick up everything.
Mm-hmm.
They did believe it was likely that the child was alive when put in the sleeper as well. And the boxers did not return any fibers that were shown on the sleeper, but the gray rustling shirt did return results of blue paint and fibers consistent on the sleeper. They were linked, so now they needed to find the right Panther wrestling team.
Yeah, so, and it is super weird too, this like blue sleeper on like a 10-year-old boy. Like that's not exactly what 10-year-olds are wearing. And like, it's just very, very odd. It's just like, find this kid and like Panther wrestling team. How many high schools in America probably have a Panther, or colleges? Like all of them.
Like trying to track that down is going to be really hard. So with these results, they did decide to bury the little boy. The community pitched in to give him a service. A woman donated a family space, and the community gave him the name Matthew, which means gift of God. So they're really coming together, trying to like do right by this little boy that no one knows who he is. So in November of 1987, the Digest magazine published an article for the December edition and put a feature about the little boy. So it was coming out on the 2-year anniversary of them finding him and still having no leads. After this magazine came out, police received a phone call. So Abner Petersheim, which I hope is pronounced correctly, called from Ohio saying that he didn't want to get involved, but he did see some similarities between the boy described and a child he knew as Daniel Stutzman. So the father was a man named Eli Stutzman. So he used to babysit Danny before Eli and Danny moved out west. He said Danny was born on September 7th, 1976, had blonde hair, blue eyes, and freckles, and Danny had been living with foster parents before Eli picked him up on the way to Ohio before Christmas in 1985. Danny never made it, and he said the boy had died in a car accident. So Abner said he didn't have a photo because Eli and Danny were Amish, and the Amish don't allow pictures, so they didn't have any kind of way to know for sure that this was him at this time.
Which I thought was interesting because, like, I didn't know, like, I know the Amish are very, like, no technology, but I didn't know, like, pictures, especially,
I
like,
did think that was interesting,
a very
too.
no-go.
So, I was about to say, if we have any Amish listeners to let us know, but I'm guessing that we probably do not.
No, I don't think they
do. Any, like, ex-Amish listeners, because I know that happens.
Also, we'll kind of see in the story too, like there's different levels of Amish. Like some of them like will have certain things. So, but I don't know how far that line goes.
Yeah. So again, it's starting to make a little more sense, like why no one has come forward, because in the Amish community, like you're not seeing all of these headlines and everything. So the police get a hold of Danny's foster parents, who did have a school photo of him. I'm guessing the foster parents were not Amish.
No, I'll go into it later, how Eli like left the Amish community. Like he's not in the Amish community.
I did read all of the notes. I just want to say, because I made that mistake last time. I did read all of these notes, but I just wanted to confirm that.
Yes.
Okay. So they also noticed similarities in the article, but they didn't think that it was connected. But the school photo confirmed that the little boy was Danny Stutzman. So who is Danny? Why didn't his father report him missing? Well, let's back up and learn a little more about Eli Stutzman. So Eli H. Stutzman had a farm in Apple Creek, Ohio, which is an Amish community. And when Eli Stutzman was 18, his hand was caught in an antiquated sorghum press. Don't know if that's pronounced correctly.
No clue.
A very bad accident. Yes. So he did have an infection and lose some fingers, and he was fitted with a hook and was known as One-Handed Eli, which like is so sad. Like that poor kid.
Yeah.
So Eli married Susan Miller, and they had 13 children together. Their fourth son, born on September 28th, 1950, was also named Eli, so he was Eli E, and his family called him Eli Ollie to not confuse him with one-handed Eli. So Eli was a bright child. He did have a slight stutter. He showed early interest in horses, and he hated farm work. He did enjoy being the center of attention, and by the age of 6 or 7, it was clear that he was a habitual liar. So when Eli was going through Rumspringa, he met Ida Gingrich. So Rumspringa is a time for like dating and like exploring things outside of the Amish faith, like usually as a teenager, a young adult, like it's a time for you to like safely go out and see what the world is like outside of the Amish community to like decide if you want to stay in the Amish community, and you're not like excommunicated for it. Like it's
like an accepted
allowed
time kind of. Yeah. So like go see what the real world looks like, have your little fun, drink some beer, watch a TV, but if you're coming back, you're coming back.
Yeah. So Eli and Ida dated for 4 years. So when he turned 21, he moved to a farm across the road with a man named Moses Kime. So Moses' church was less restrictive than the one the Stutzmans attended. So on February 12th, 1972, Eli passed out while he was getting ready for a date with Ida. So doctors were brought in, but it just appeared that like his nerves were shot, that he was in a depressive state, and this really seemed to go on for months, and Eli did eventually decide to leave the Amish faith. So in August, a New Order Amish couple took Eli in and gave him room and board in exchange for chores. The couple helped him buy non-Amish clothes, get a driver's license, buy a car. So as Courtney mentioned earlier, like there are different like sects or levels or, so the New Order Amish is a little bit more progressive. They have phones, indoor plumbing, electricity. They use tractors. So Eli did go a little wild with this new freedom. He started dating a lot of women and going to bars, which may seem pretty tame to us, but like that's super wild behavior to the Amish. Like this is just out there.
Yeah, especially if like you don't have indoor plumbing and now you're like going to bars. Like his family was probably like, whoa, this guy's gone off the deep end.
Out of control.
But yeah, to us, it's like, oh, you mean just an average weekend in college.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, a very different like lifestyle, like definitely a huge culture shock. So in 1974, Eli even became an informant for the police. He told them about weed that was being grown on a farm, and they believe that he did it to try to get better odds at being accepted into the police academy. And Eli was later found beaten badly, and he told many stories about who did it, but in the end, it came out that he had just done it to himself.
Yeah, remember that 6 or 7-year-old who was like a compulsive liar? It hasn't changed.
Yeah, still there. So now, after all of this drama, Eli decides that he's going to return to the Amish faith. So he decides to come back and marry Ida, and they got married on December 25th, 1975, and a few weeks later, Ida learned that she was pregnant. So Ida gave birth to a blue-eyed, blonde-haired baby boy who she named Daniel. So when Danny was 6 months old, Ida learned she was pregnant again. On July 7th, 1977, Eli and Ida got a loan for $55,000. And soon after, on July 11th, in a very suspicious barn fire, Ida died. So Eli didn't really seem concerned. He seemed very distant. But they thought this was like due to his religion because Amish men didn't really show emotion. Like that was kind of frowned upon. So they're like, maybe that's part of it. But something else that was suspicious was that an attorney had just been to their house to contract up their will, like right before. So Eli told Ida's parents that she had woken up in the middle of the night to a sound of popping and went outside. He said she ran into the barn to save the milk and the fire just consumed her. He said her heart must have failed. So many in the community found it odd and thought her death was pretty suspicious. And during the autopsy, mostly Ida's left side was burnt. She did have long scratches across her forehead from the bridge of her nose to her left eyebrow, as well as a bloody laceration on the corner of her mouth. So at the time of the autopsy, Ida's death wasn't really investigated because they just believed Eli's story. But looking back, there are a lot of discrepancies. Eli said that Ida had woken him up at the sound of the pop and saw smoke, and he told her to run to the neighbor's house. He also said that she was found laying on her back. So the autopsy had revealed that her left breast was badly burnt and was likely exposed at the time. So why would her dress be open if she was running to the neighbor's house? That doesn't really add up. He also later changed his story to say that she was trying to save some things from the milk barn first, including vats. But the vats were used for like washing tubs, so it seems unlikely that this would be like the thing that you go to save in a house fire. Like that doesn't really add up.
Yeah, like why? Like if you're trying to save milk or food or something that's hard to come by,
Yeah.
okay, but like a vat, like a washing tub, like we can replace that very easily.
Yeah, exactly. And the scratches on her face wouldn't really make sense with the fall landing on her back either. And in hindsight, the laceration on her mouth clearly showed some kind of hit, like she had been hit with something by someone before her death. If she had also fallen, like trying to pull out the vats, you would think she would be lying forward. A lot of things that don't add up here. But at the time, they just ruled her death of natural causes, citing cardiac arrest. And Eli told him that Ida had a weak heart and that the overwhelm just must have like stopped her heart. Like it was just too much. She couldn't handle it. And in the Amish community, they believe that the Amish do not commit murder. So they're like, okay, we accept this story and we move on. You're Amish. There's no way you murdered anyone.
I was surprised in general they did an autopsy because I didn't think they believed in like
Yeah,
modern medicine type things. And if they're believing his story, I was like really surprised they did an autopsy.
Yeah, because like they have like their own law enforcement and everything, right? Like
I'm not sure. Probably.
hold.
But I do also wonder if like the whole like lawyer and like insurance and stuff, like was that like a requirement to prove that it was like a natural causes death and not, you know.
Yeah.
The book mentioned a lot about the Amish that I did not include and clearly have forgotten.
Patreon November? No. Okay, so this is my very quick Google search, so this may not be accurate. This is also from 2006, but also I feel like stuff in the Amish community hasn't changed that much in the last 15 years. But it says that in a community that's largely left to police itself, there are no courts and no set punishments attached to given transgressions. So it sounds like they kind of govern and police themselves. I did see another article talking specifically about Rumspringa that says that Amish youth should cooperate with police, like with like state, county, whatever police. So anyway, our very brief Amish police.
Yeah, and there's so many different sex.
That word is hard to say. It sounds like sex, but
there's many different.
I'm pretty sure I said sex earlier, but you know what I mean.
I know I said it like I know what my brain was trying to say, but I think it came out.
Yes.
But there's different
but you're
types of Amish too. I don't know. That sounded bad too. I'm gonna stop talking.
It's a word that's much easier written than spoken. So the whole community did come together to help rebuild their barn. But they said Eli was just very weird in his grieving process, which we also know can be very normal. I mean, grieving people do and say and think all kinds of things. But he did get rid of Ida's rocking chair, and he asked his father-in-law to build a chest to put her clothes in. So he claimed that it was for Danny to have one day, but they said that he seemed kind of insincere, that he really just like wanted things out of the way. And shortly after the new barn was built, expensive racehorses were delivered. So also interesting. Also around this time, Ida's twin brothers, Amos and Andy, reported that one night when they were 15, they stayed with Eli and he had rubbed his erect penis on them.
Not great. Not great.
So no. So on July 11th, 1978, Eli was admitted to a psychiatric hospital after he was found screaming around the house and screaming at Danny. He checked out on September 1st, but the brothers didn't really seem convinced that he was actually better. So just before Christmas in 1978, Eli visited his cousin and asked if he could leave Danny with him for a little while he traveled. But Eli never called to check up on him while he was gone. He was also like writing to his in-laws at this time as if Danny was still with him. So Danny was with his cousin, was not checking in with him, but was writing to the in-laws, like talking about stuff he was doing. But Eli did get Danny and returned to Ohio in March. And Eli was talking about being excommunicated from the Amish at this time. Danny was known for being quiet and like didn't really pay much attention to visitors. And one time he was also found next to a stack of pornographic material and really just showed a lot of signs of a child who was being abused. Eli was also beginning to experiment with his sexuality at this time. So he entered into many relationships with men. He would have parties at his farm and like barn parties for a bunch of gay men. And one man who had an ongoing sexual relationship with him said that he did seem to care for Danny and they wouldn't have sex until Danny was in bed.
I feel like that's a low standard for a parent, though. Well,
Right?
he really cared
Like,
for his son. We wouldn't have sex until he was in bed. And I'm like, I agree that's a good move, but like that is your like star example of being a great father.
yeah, it's like that's the very bare minimum here, guys. Like Eli had also told him how Danny had a stutter and he was trying to find a therapist to help him. And then in March of 1982, Eli sold the farm for $200,000. So Eli moved to Colorado near the Four Corners, which is where Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah meet, which, side note, is on my bucket list of places to go to. I don't know if it's any fun, but it sounds like a good time.
Patreon meetup? Let's go.
Let's do it. I'm down. Okay. So this area had a flourishing gay community, which Eli was really excited to partake in. But during a few parties, Eli would bring Danny, and people reported seeing Eli encourage Danny to grab men's crotches, grope them, swat their butts. Danny was 5 at this time.
Yeah,
5 years old. So when a woman called him out, he said, "I'm going to train him so he'll never have to deal with women." So Eli's teaching his son to like undress men and be sexual with them again at 5 years old,
and saying never have to deal with a woman when he clearly very likely offed his wife.
Yeah. So at parties, someone even heard Eli say that he was going to turn Danny over to his buddies for sexual favors. A lot of those, like at these parties in relations with Eli, noticed Danny always being around and like these odd behaviors, but none of them reported it. And one woman even said that she didn't report it out of fear of like being asked why she was there. So they're like, this is a very hush hush community.
It is the 80s, like if you were like, I saw him doing this at this party, and it's like, oh, so you were like at a gay party, and then it's like we'll kind of see that later in a few details of this case too, where it's like people are just not going to come forward because they're like, I'm not going to out myself, it's too dangerous.
Yeah. So Danny was seeing the speech pathologist at his elementary school, and one day he came in with a black eye and bruises on his arm. So the speech pathologist suspected that there could be abuse, and they did discuss it in a staff meeting, but there was no formal complaint ever submitted.
And this right here is very unexcusable. The others, I'm like, okay, you should have reported it, but I get it because you're putting yourself in danger. But this is like, your whole job is to help this kid, and now you're seeing him abused, and you're just like not doing anything.
And you went to the effort of like having a meeting to discuss. If you have a meeting to discuss, do we think this is abuse? You should be reporting
like
said
a black
suspected
eye
abuse
on a child, on an elementary school child, like, and bruises on his arm. Like, I mean, yeah, kids are reckless and can hurt themselves, but when you've already suspected abuse and then he comes in with that, like, you have to report that.
And I get that, like, people are fearful of like child protective services and like they don't want to wrongfully accuse someone or have someone like get their kids taken away without cause. But I mean, for the most part, like these people are here to help. Like they want to make sure that children are safe. And I'm assuming it was the same at this time, but all teachers, anyone who works with a child is legally a mandated reporter. If you suspect any kind of abuse, you have to report that abuse. And the fact that they suspected it, had a meeting to discuss it, and then decided against doing anything is just disgusting.
I wonder too, if they had reported it, what would have happened, because this is the 80s. If he would have been like, well, I was disciplining him. And I mean, they would probably, I don't know when they stopped spanking in schools, but I mean, for a long time when my parents were in school. So it's like, would they have just been like, yeah, you're right, he acted up, you gotta discipline him? So then it's like, you know, it's kind of hard to figure out what would have happened. Like, would this whole story change or would it be exactly the same?
Yeah. So Danny did have a pretty strict routine, and his bedtime was important to Eli because whenever he went to bed, then Eli could go out. Eli did have a lot of men living with him throughout the years. Some of them said that there were never any signs of abuse. Others said there were times that he would hit Danny for speaking, would like pinch his butt in a really inappropriate way, just not okay behavior. So in May of 1985, Eli pulled Danny out of school with 2 weeks left, which is, again, odd. And Danny didn't know he was leaving until his dad picked him up, just like randomly picked him up from school and said, "We're out of here." So it seemed possible that Eli was running from something. So also in May of 1985, skip into a little side story here, Raymond Kiki had been smelling some odor for a few days. He thought it was likely a dead cow or a calf on the farm in Pilot Knob, which is south of Austin, Texas. And on May 12th, when he finally went to check it out, he discovered that it was a dead body. So this rural area was kind of common for dumped bodies. A clump of dark hair was found on the male victim's shoulder, and the eyes were missing from like animal activity. The pants were unzipped and pushed down the legs, so they did wonder if this was a sexual predator. The victim had no shirt, shoes, or underwear, and there did appear to be a gunshot to the head. So the autopsy showed that he had been shot through the left eye, and they believe that he was probably shot by someone shorter than him, like based on the angle and everything.
So they were able to get fingerprints from the body during the autopsy, and investigators attempted to use it in identifying the victim. And on June 3rd, a call came back from the FBI, and they did have a match to their John Doe's fingerprints, and they belonged to Glen Albert Pritchard. So Glen Albert Pritchard was born in 1961 to Bob and Evelyn Pritchard, who were members of the Church of Latter-day Saints. So he did have a younger brother and two older sisters. And from an early age, Glen was just like really like rebellious, especially against religion. And he began to drink and skip school, smoke pot, cause mischief, just like really like rebelling against any rules. He resented authority and was always running away. So his parents eventually did put him in a foster home when they believed he was like too much to handle. They were just like, "You're too much." So they just like put him into a foster home.
Which, like, I also just cannot imagine being like, "My kid's just too much to handle. I'm just going to give you away." What?
Especially too, because like skipping school and like drinking and all that, like he was likely in high school too. So you're just like, bye at like a teenager.
Yeah, right?
So eventually he did move on to another foster family, and he actually fit in very well with this family. And he did say it was the closest thing to an actual family he ever felt. So once he got to a certain home, he did feel like this feels more like a family than anything I've ever met. So eventually, Glen met a girl named Sandy Taylor. This is an alias. They had planned to run away together, but did eventually get married on September 15th, 1978. And after their marriage, he decided to join the Coast Guard. So he was 17, and they're like, okay, he's turning his life around. Like he's joining the Coast Guard. He's getting married. He's going to settle down. And he did officially enlist on February 6, 1979. But Glen really wasn't a big fan of the Coast Guard and where all it was like taking them. They were having to travel a lot. And I mean, you didn't really like high school with the rules. You're not gonna like the Coast Guard.
Definitely not.
The couple did have a daughter, and then Glen started partying again, and he would just like leave his wife and daughter at home to party. So he's like, "Oh, I'm moving you all around the country on this job, and I'm also gonna leave you home alone with our daughter to go party all night." And the couple also had a son in 1982. And the next year, Glen was discharged from the Coast Guard, and he mostly just sat around and drank while collecting unemployment while Sandy worked. So she's really getting like the shit end of the stick here.
Yeah, for sure.
So Glen was arrested on September 6, 1983 for drunk driving, and 2 days later, Sandy filed for divorce. The court did order Glen to pay $75 per month per child, and Glen did go to rehab, but he did start drinking again soon after he was released. So even though Sandy had filed for divorce, they were still kind of on and off again, during this time. Like he was still kind of staying the night. And during this time, also police like would frequently get calls to like their house on like domestic disputes and stuff. So very on and off, very tumultuous relationship. But their divorce was finalized on October 13th. They still saw each other and they were like really hoping they could get back together someday. But I think it was just kind of like with Glen's drinking and like the whole situation, they were like, we love each other, but we are not working with each other. So in the fall of 1984, Glen got a job in Missoula, Montana at 4B's South Restaurant, and he moved out of Sandy's apartment. He still had fights with Sandy, especially when she was going on dates with other men. So even after the divorce, they're still just going at it. And in September, he decided to leave Missoula. So he traveled around to see his siblings, and he even worked in Reno for a while, but did eventually get a construction job in Austin and moved into a house with some other men. Glen was still drinking and he did keep calling Sandy, so much so that she had to eventually change her number. So he's just like not leaving Sandy alone. Like he's wanting this to work.
He cannot let go here.
So when investigators were trying to find anything that could help them figure out what happened to Glen, they discovered that in December 1984, Glen had been questioned in a parking lot with a man named Eli Stutzman, who he lived with. So
you're telling me we're not just telling this side story for no reason?
No, we did not derail for no reason. We have a reason. We have a purpose. I know we are unhinged so much, but not in this moment.
We're bringing it all together.
Yes. So while this seemed like a great lead, the investigator kind of sat on it for a week. He was just like, I'll investigate that later. So a coworker really believes like homophobia played a role in this. So he was like, oh, he was found with a man who he lives with. Like, I'm not looking at that. The book was very good, but you can feel a lot of homophobia and terms that we just do not use anymore and assumptions we don't use anymore. But like, I could definitely see him, this officer just being like, whatever.
Yeah.
But if he had searched it, he would know Glen also worked frequently for Eli and would go out with them. So they hung out often and they even went to a friend's wedding together. And even though Glen was hanging out with Eli, Glen was straight and did not participate in consensual sex with Eli or any of the other like gay men who he hung out with. So he's like, I know like my coworkers and the people I live with are gay, but that's not me. I don't really care. They're just my roommates. I'm not participating. So they went to Eli's house and spoke with him, letting him know they're investigating Glen's murder. And he told investigators he put him on a bus to Montana in May. So they did ask, like, do you have any guns? And he did say he had a .22 rifle and a 16 gauge shotgun. So a .22 caliber was the same type as the murder weapon. So investigators are a little suspicious now because they're like, we know you've been with this guy. You're claiming that you're the last person to see him, putting him on a bus. You have a gun that matches the murder weapon gun. So when they told him Glen was murdered, he just claimed that he thought he was alive and in Montana, and he just didn't really seem interested in what happened. So his coworker, a man who lived with him, a man he partied with, they say he's murdered, and he's just like, all right, I think he's in Montana.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know about that. I think he's over here. I don't know. Okay.
And he didn't ask a single question about what happened. So I would think even if it was someone who was like more of an acquaintance and they're murdered, I'd be like, what happened? Where were they found? Like, it's kind of natural to ask questions about what happened. Sure. And this is a huge red flag to investigators when people don't ask questions because they're like, it's because you already know.
Yeah, because I mean, if you are told that, hey, your previous roommate and person that you worked with and someone you were close to, like, was found dead, and you're just like,
Like, even if you hate the person, like, I feel like you would be like, what happened? Like, give me the gossip. Yeah. Like, we are humans. We want to know, like, details.
This is why you are currently listening to this podcast.
Exactly. Eli also had a pickup truck that could transport the body and a weapon that could match the murder weapon. So they're like, we don't have any concrete evidence, but you're looking a little suspicious here. So they also questioned another one of Eli's roommates, Denny Rustin. So Denny had been in love with Eli and wanted a relationship, but Eli did not reciprocate those feelings. And Eli told him exactly what to say when he met with the police. So he's like, Denny, like, when you meet with the police, tell them this. And he told him to tell like certain dates that Eli dropped Glen off at the bus station. However, they weren't very thorough, and there's a lot of discrepancy in Eli and Denny's stories, so they're not exactly matching up. Denny also told investigators that Eli left one night and told him his lawyer told him it was best. So Eli's like, my lawyer said get out of town, and that's what I'm doing, which...
that's a big red flag.
I don't think that's what your lawyer told you to do. You never run. So he left with Danny, and Denny thought it was weird because he didn't take any of Danny's stuff. So Eli's leaving with his 10-year-old son and does not take any of his clothes, any of his stuff. Like, that's kind of weird. Like, you're not just like you had enough time to pack up some stuff.
Yeah.
So Denny did become kind of spooked after talking to investigators and finding out like Glen's dead, and he was found near a pasture where Eli actually kept horses too. So Denny's like, now I know that Eli has a reason to be over there. And he's like, what do I do now? So Denny did talk with a friend about it, and they believe Eli could have been involved. So like after talking about it, they were like, I mean, maybe he could be. So Denny was in love with Eli and like trying to downplay his involvement too. Like, oh, like Eli's perfect. He wouldn't do anything, but maybe he did. Like, he's really conflicted on his emotions right now.
Yeah.
But he did find a log of Glen's showing that Eli owed Glen money, but the last entry said 5/5/1985 paid in full. But it didn't match any of the previous like Glen's writing. And May 5th was when Eli said he dropped Glen off at the bus station. So they're like, Eli owes Glen all this money, and now suddenly he's paid it in full. And Glen left this log and like he paid it all off. Like it's a bit
a little suspicious.
Yeah. So Denny did take this evidence to the cops. He thought this was like their slam dunk, and they were like, it's great, but this isn't like,
This is still circumstantial.
Yeah.
We need a lot more evidence here.
Eli at this time was also explaining Glen's disappearance to a mutual friend, saying, oh, he just had a family emergency and he had to go back. So now he's like talking to other people, being like, oh, I dropped Glen off. He had a family emergency, like just really weaving into the story. So Leona Weaver was also a friend of Denny and Eli's. And so Denny had confided in her a lot. So she went to Eli's house and saw how much he'd left behind and like knew he was gone. She was like, this guy's on the run. He did not even like, close the door on his way out. I mean, not exactly, but he just left.
Yeah. And like, especially with children too, it's like children need or want lots of things with them. So if you're just like going on a trip or like moving or whatever, like you're going to take your kid's stuff. I mean, like I pack a whole damn car full to take a vacation with my one child.
Yeah.
So
Leona decided that she was going to help the cops. She had been given Eli's new phone number and agreed to call him and like try and get his confession on tape. So investigators really tried to not sway her too much because they wanted whatever they got to stand up in court. So they were like, we're not going to tell you what to say because we don't want to seem like you're leading or, it somehow get thrown out by a judge. So the detectives are like, just get him to keep talking and hopefully he'll say something. So Eli did mention in the phone call how his gun was used to kill Glen, but there could be 2 sets of fingerprints. But only the killer or someone who knew about the murder would know it was the right gun because investigators haven't told anyone that it was Eli's gun that matched the murder weapon.
And to be like, well, yeah, it was my gun, but like I didn't do it is a little okay.
Eli also kept mentioning a guy named Jay who he believed did it. But Jay didn't exist. Like investigators searched really hard for this like Jay and could not find him anywhere. And overall, Eli sounded just very nervous on the phone. So in late June, Eli asked Dean and Margie Barlow to watch over Danny until he picked him up again in late September and headed for Colorado. So in the book, it talks about this a lot. Like poor Danny was just picked up and dropped off at random places like all the time. Like you just never knew.
Sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Eli left on December 10th and pawned 2 guns he'd stolen from someone he was staying with, and he went to a store and purchased a blue sleeper, and he sent a letter talking about how Danny wanted to spend Christmas with his friends. He was like, Danny doesn't want to spend Christmas with me. He wants to go with his friends. And then on December 15th, 1985, Eli met up with a man. The book uses an alias, but he had found this man through a personal ad. So they did have sex, and Eli told him about the murder in Austin. He didn't really say much about the victim, Glen, but did say it was his roommate and an employee.
I don't think you had any other roommate employees who were murdered, so.
And he also said his attorney was taking care of the situation. So, Eli told this man that Danny wanted to stay in Wyoming for Christmas and to ski. And he told many people this, like even into January. He was like, yeah, like Danny's just not wanting to come home. He's loving skiing, this fucking 10-year-old with his friends. However, in April, he did tell some friends that Danny had died in a traffic accident in Salt Lake City. So now all of a sudden he's just like, oh, by the way, my son's dead. Just dead. It's like, what?
You're like, you don't just casually mention that.
And they thought it was very alarming because he had no emotion when he said it. Like, you had lost your pregnant wife a few years ago, and now you're losing your son, and you're just like, okay. And they're like, you think a man who lost his son would show a little bit of emotion? A little bit.
Yeah.
And just before Christmas is when he dropped Danny on the side of the road in Nebraska. So he had picked him back up and been the one to drop him off, in case you were wondering. However, when Eli was writing to his in-laws, Ida's parents, he kept saying how Danny was with him and enjoyed school and playing soccer. And he didn't tell them until late July that Danny had, quote, died in a traffic accident. And he said that was on July 21st. So he told other people that he died in April. And now he's telling his in-laws he died on July 21st and that the post office wasn't able to get the message in time. So they just missed the services.
What?
And he also sent the same letter to his own parents. So he was like, by the way, Danny's dead. You missed the service. Sorry, goodbye. And like,
what a piece of shit.
Up until this point was also writing like Danny was still with him too this whole time when he clearly was not. So on December 11th, 1987, we're going to go back to the beginning. A warrant for Eli's arrest was officially issued. The charge was felony child abuse. They did, however, have to try and prove like abuse happened in Nebraska for it to try to stick, because they're like, we think he dropped the body, but we have to prove there was like some kind of abuse that it happened in this state, like a lot of loopholes. On December 13th, an officer was driving through a trailer park in Azale, Texas, when he ran plates on a car that did come back belonging to Eli. So they did wait until the morning, and at 7:45 a.m. on the 14th, they surrounded the mobile home, and 3 men stepped out. The second was Eli. So when they searched him, nothing was found on Eli, and so much nothing that it was concerning because there wasn't even a single picture of Danny, his dead son, in his wallet. And like, he just lost his son. There were no remainders of him, nothing.
Yeah, and like, this is the 80s where like you don't have 8,000 pictures on your cell phone. Like, you have pictures in your wallet. So this is very weird.
And he didn't even keep like a toy of his, a piece of his clothes, like nothing of Danny's was found. They did, however, no pictures of Danny, but did find a business card for a doctor in his wallet. So they called the doctor and he said, yeah, I have been treating Eli for a head injury. He also informed the officers that Eli was HIV positive. So Eli agreed to talk, but only to Ted Garber. He's like, I will only talk to this one man. Eli also said he would not talk about the death of his son. But like, he would only do it if like only the sheriff heard it. He was like, I don't want anyone else to hear this. I don't want the media to hear it. I don't want anyone to hear it except the sheriff.
Sir, it does not work this way.
Yeah. It's like, why are you so specific on who you're going to talk to? So they did kind of push him on the story of Ida's death, and he did stick to the story he told about for years about it being an accident. So Ted's trying really hard to push at him. He's like yelling at him, like, come on, we all know it's a lie. But Eli does not budge. He still is like, it was an accident. And he claimed that he had heard gunshots in his house and people arguing around the time of Glen's murder, but didn't know who it was. So before he dropped him off at the bus station, now he's hearing gunshots in his house and people arguing.
Eli's got a lot of different stories going on here.
Yeah. He also said he'd picked Danny up and was traveling cross country when he noticed that Danny wasn't feeling good. So he eventually stopped and noticed that a blanket was around his head, and he took it off and saw his eyes roll in the back of his head. And he said he panicked, didn't know if Danny was still alive. Like, he's claiming, like, my son was sleeping in the back and a blanket got around his head and I think he suffocated himself.
Like, he's 10. He's not an infant.
Yeah, like he knows how to take a blanket off his head.
Yeah.
And Ted is pushing him on this because he's like, I don't believe you because you're showing no emotion, like still, like not a single bit of emotion. And Eli said he didn't seek medical help because he panicked and decided to just leave him. He didn't know for sure if he was dead or not when he left him. So he was like, he could have still been alive when I left him out in the fucking snow. And he said he laid him down and covered him with a little bit of snow, and he didn't want to bury him. He, quote, wanted to leave him where God could find him. But after he did this, he drove to see a boyfriend in Kansas.
Like, I'm just so beyond disgusted and appalled right now.
Yeah. So you're claiming your 10-year-old son was in a blanket. You truly believe he could have been alive. So you could have taken him to the hospital, but instead you just leave him in the snow. So in more disgust, Eli gave book, movie, and television rights to disbarred attorney Frank Hefner. So the movie rights would pay for Eli's attorney fees. So he's like, yeah, I'll give you these rights if you pay for my attorney. And Frank was believing Eli was innocent and was saying they had, quote, evidence to prove it. Like, we have evidence to prove his innocence. Okay. So Nebraska was going to charge Eli with 2 misdemeanors, abandoning a body and concealing a death. So detectives in Texas are disgusted by these small charges. They're like,
Same.
He left his 10-year-old son in the snow and you're charging him with 2 misdemeanors? Like, what are you doing?
Like, misdemeanors. I just cannot fathom.
Yeah. So Eli took the stand and testified about the story about how Danny was sick. He thought he was dead. So they did push him on how he lied to numerous people about Danny's death. They were like, you've told like 4 different stories about how he died, where he was, all this. And Eli's attorney tried to say that he only had an 8th grade education and it might be reasonable for someone with a lower education to leave Danny there believing he was dead. So he's like, oh, he's not that smart. Of course he leaves his son.
Okay. In 8th grade, you're like 13. I don't think even a 13-year-old would do that.
No. Most children are trained from a young age of, if something's wrong, get help.
Yeah.
Call 911, do something.
And like, you don't just leave someone, oh, I don't know if they're dead or not, so I'll leave them here, especially your own child. Like, how?
Yeah. Anyway, and they asked for leniency, which he does not deserve any. He was sentenced to 1 year for the charge of abandoning a human body and 6 months for concealing a death, and the counts were run concurrent. So after this trial was over, Texas is like, oh, hell no. They're like, we are bringing him here to face charges of murder for the murder of Glen Pritchard. And if you know Texas, Texas does not fuck around.
Yeah.
But their case was circumstantial. So they don't really have any physical evidence tying Eli to Glen's murder, but they do have like loads of circumstantial evidence. So they did plan to show the similarities in deaths of Danny and Glen, like with the dumping practices, the elaborate cover-ups, like both of these, like he dumps them kind of in remote areas and he's telling people 50 million different stories about where they are and what happened to them. However, this motion was denied and they could not bring up Danny at all in their case.
Wow.
Which I guess I get, but also like that is a damning piece of evidence. And the defense offered no witnesses. Like the defense like almost like didn't even try. They were just like, we have no witnesses. I guess no one wanted to speak highly of Eli.
I mean, I don't blame them.
And many honestly thought he was going to be set free on these charges just due to the lack of the evidence presented by the state and a lot of reasonable doubt. However, the jury did actually find him guilty. So he was sentenced to 40 years in the Texas Department of Corrections at Huntsville in August 1989. So now, since Eli was guilty, no movie could be made due to Son of Sam laws. So that was taken away. And Eli denied all media interviews. So in 1990, investigators believed Eli was a prime suspect in the murders of David Tyler and Dennis Slaeter as well. So David Tyler was described by friends as friendly, mellow, an occasional drug user, and a good mechanic. He liked to hang out at the Diamond Bell Saloon. He did carry a gun because he had received death threats over the phone due to his sexuality. And on November 11th, 1985, in Durango, Colorado, 36-year-old David Tyler's body was found. So a tourist saw the body from a passenger window on the narrow gauge roadway. And she mentioned to her husband, and she was like, look at that guy. Doesn't he just kind of look like he's just laying there? And her husband was like, I'm sure it's just an unhoused individual. He's just sleeping. It's fine.
Oh, okay.
But when they came back, he still hadn't moved. And her husband was like, okay, honey, I think you're right. Let's call the police.
At least he acknowledged it at that point and wasn't just like, yeah, he's just sleeping a long time.
I mean, I have seen it before too, especially driving downtown sometimes where I'm like, are you moving?
That is true. That is true. We were at this by the river in the city a few weeks ago, and there was a guy that was sleeping on a bench, and we were sitting, I guess it was a couple months ago because I was feeding Millie. But we were sitting at a bench next to the bench where he was, and I was looking out of the corner of my eye, watching for his chest to rise and fall, because I was I need to make sure this guy's alive. And he was just taking a little nap, but
Yeah, sometimes they are just taking a nap and sleeping, but sometimes you're just I'm looking for the chest movements. I'm looking for the chest movements.
Yeah, exactly.
And especially it's kind of far away too, so you're just kind of
true. That's true.
But they did call the police, thankfully, when they were he still hasn't moved and it's been a full day. So David had been bludgeoned to death, and his car was found near a motel where he'd been partying on November 8th. So Dennis Slaeter was described as a gentle giant. He was only 24 when he was found murdered in a storage room at Junction Creek Liquors in Durango. He had been shot in the back of the head, and cash from the store was missing. So there was no evidence of a struggle, but he could have been forced at gunpoint or known the killer. So they were he could have known someone, which is why he's not struggling. Or if someone has a gun to your head, you're likely to comply because you think it's going to save your life. And Dennis was actually 2 weeks away from earning a degree in industrial psychology from Fort Lewis College. He did enjoy the mountains, playing touch football, and he was learning to telemarket ski, which is a combination of alpine and Nordic skiing.
You said telemarket? This says telemark.
He's skiing and calling people about their extended car warranty.
It's a pretty cool system they got going on. You just ski down the road, you make some phone calls, fill out your spreadsheet. It's a good time.
Yeah, that does say telemark ski. I guess I have telemarketers on my mind. Telemark ski. It uses a squatting motion on downhill skis. I don't know anything about skiing. All these words are foreign to me.
I don't think they're telemarketing skiing, though. Maybe they are. Never know.
I'm going to start it. I'm going to start that. Anyway. So Dennis had known David Tyler, and he used drugs with David some and had been to his house. So they're both victims do know each other. And it was also speculated that he was gay. It was not confirmed, but it was speculated a lot. And at the time of their murders, the gay community in Durango became very fearful because they're we haven't seen a murder in 3 years, and now 2 gay men are dead within a month. Somebody's targeting gay men.
Yeah.
And that's very scary. So people had seen Eli or someone matching his description talking to David and saying he owed him money. And Eli was also known to be in Durango around this time. So they're we really think it's him because he kind of matches up. However, many witnesses were scared to come forward because they were scared they would be publicly outed as gay. So he was never charged due to lack of evidence on these two, but investigators are pretty confident it was him. He still denies any part in Danny's death. And he believes there was a cover-up among police of how Danny really died.
Like, you admitted that you were pretty sure he was dead, could be dead. You weren't positive, and you left him on the side of the road. But then you want to come and say that someone else was involved in your son's death.
Yeah, and there's like a big cover-up about how he died and stuff. It's him again, just changing his story like 40 million times. God. And Danny's cause of death has never been officially determined. They're like, we don't know if it was natural causes, neglect, or murder. Like, it was never able to really be figured out. And if Eli did kill Danny, they aren't really sure of the motive either. So, like, they're thinking that maybe Danny heard Eli mentioning Glen's murder, and now, he's 10, he's old enough to possibly talk. People like the family he was with before Eli picked him up said he never mentioned anything about it, but maybe Eli was scared, or maybe Eli just simply didn't want the boy anymore and he didn't want to return him to his Amish family and be raised by them. And so he's like just trying to get rid of him. Like, they aren't really sure like what his motive was at this point.
Yeah.
Although Eli was sentenced to 40 years, he only served 13. 13 years. He was let out on parole in 2005, and he did live in Fort Worth, Texas after his release. He did try to maintain a quiet life, and he made and sold leather goods, including like purses and Bible covers from his apartment. I do want to give a trigger warning here. We will be talking about suicide. On January 13th, 2007, Eli was found dead in his apartment of an apparent death by suicide. He did have a sharp force injury on his left arm that had cut a vein. So they do believe it was self-inflicted. So he was HIV positive, like we mentioned earlier, and he had very high levels of cocaine in his body. So only served 13 years, but killed himself after being out for 2. So he is no longer on this earth. But that is the story of the murders of Glen Pritchard, David Tyler, Dennis Slaeter, and very, very almost confirmed Danny and Ida Stutzman.
Wow.
And it's just crazy so because sad. This is never talked about. And the book used is like really the only anything there is. Like, any news article you find gives a very brief description and says there's a book about it called Abandoned Prayers, or, it's just very, very much on this book. And he did use a lot of like interviews and transcripts, and it is very thoroughly researched, but it's just crazy that like this man,
no one ever talks about it.
And especially too, I believe people get like, they love when there's like a new quote unquote new element to stories. You know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, he was Amish. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like people would like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, sensationalize that because it's like different. You know what I mean?
Like, that would be something like a story for them to like run with. And
but like nobody talks about this. I've never heard anyone talk about it. And when I started the book, because Jaclyn got it for me for like a Christmas present, I started it and I was like, this is a true story, right? Like, how am I not finding anything?
How do we not know this?
Because I was like just doing like a preliminary little search to make sure I had like names right. And I'm like, there's nothing about it out there.
Yeah. You can see the very jovial, happy gifts we give each other. But yeah, and I think too, because it is, as far as we know, unusual in the Amish community. Like, that's not something that they even
like when Ida died, they were like, we believe you because the Amish do not murder.
Yeah.
We do not. Like, they have a very, very strict set of rules, and they, for the most part, abide by them. And it is extreme if you break those. Like, excommunicated, like your family will never talk to you again. Like, it is very, very extreme.
Wow. Yeah, that one is super sad. Also makes me want to do more research on the Amish community because I do find it just like super fascinating. So maybe we can tie that into something in the future. Or maybe we'll just read some books on Amish just for some fun, other light reading.
I do kind of want to go because you can go to like certain places like towards the Amish community where they'll sell like stuff they make and stuff. You know what I mean? I would love to go there and do that.
Same. We'll add that to our trip where we go to the Four Corners.
Okay. It's going to be a cross country.
It sure is. Yes.
And it'll happen in, how many more kids you have in plus 18?
I know, right?
Plus 18 or whatever.
Courtney and Jaclyn's Caffeinated Crimes national
50.
tour. Here we come.
Well, how old are you now?
They'll be all right when they're like, okay, perfect.
I don't know how far out we go. Yeah, 50. I mean, they'll be fine. They're teenagers. They'll just be out with their friends.
Exactly. That'd be good. Okay, so that being said, Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is I got a promotion at work. So I'm not going to talk too much about it because I never want to say where I work. You guys know I do background checks, but I will now be a supervisor over an entire state of researchers, which is very intimidating and scary, but I am very excited. I've been kind of jonesing for a promotion for a few years now, and it was actually funny. Me and Jaclyn recorded an episode last week or at some point where I was talking about like, I'm going to talk to my boss about a promotion because he told me like I'm going to get a promotion at some point and I haven't. And like literally 2 days later, he calls me and he's like, there's a position for you. And so I was like, I manifested the hell out of that.
I'm telling you, it works. You just got to put it out there in the universe, you know?
Put it out there. So I'm very excited. It's a lot to take on in a short amount of time because the girl I'm taking over is moving very soon. So it's a little scary, but I'm so ready for the challenge and so ready to learn new things. So yeah, that is my perk of the week is yay for work goals. Moving on up. Moving on up.
Courtney is doing big things and she's going to do great at them.
Lord, I'm just going to keep telling myself I am.
You keep manifesting it. That's how it works.
Like when people like have kids and they like talk about how they look at their baby, like we're figuring this out together. That's going to be me to all the people I'm supervising. Like we're figuring this out together.
But you know what? I feel like people appreciate that versus someone that like acts like they know everything or like they have all the answers or whatever. I think people appreciate the transparency.
Yeah,
at least I do.
I'm trying. we gonna do this together. And just be honest with me, but please be nice and don't be cruel and hurt my feelings. But so that is my perk of the week. Jaclyn, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week, speaking of things that we've just manifested, is that President Biden announced today that he is forgiving $10,000 of student loan debt for people making a certain income. So I am celebrating that. I'm super excited. Hopefully nothing is overturned because I did read that there will be, quote, legal challenges, but I don't know what that means and if there is any standing, but supposedly
I don't know if you noticed also
that
all the federal student loan websites crashed today.
I did notice that because I also tried to log into
mine. I tried to log in and I was like, what's happening? And then I saw on Twitter where they were like, every single federal student loan site has crashed.
Makes sense.
That's fun.
Everyone's checking that balance to see where they're going to be at now.
Same. So, I was like, when does this take place? Right. What's Pell Grant? Do I have a Pell Grant?
What does this? What does and if you were listening to this, I did see a TikTok earlier, so I don't know, but this person on TikTok, when I've seen them talk about news things before, like they seem to know what they're talking about. I can't remember what their name is, but they did say that there's going to be an application. So if you are someone who may qualify for this forgiveness, make sure you look out for that application. So it's not just going to happen. You do have to apply for it. So
you do. I thought it was just like going
the last I heard, because they gave like a website that you can go to like sign up to like get emails about updates, but according to that, and as far as I know, like you will have to like at least fill out something. So I don't know. Everything else said it should be pretty easy because, I mean, the federal government has all of your information if you have federal student loans. Like they know where you live and how much money you make and all that. So you shouldn't have to like
know
fill out a bunch
about
of
me.
stuff. They know more stuff about me than I do.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is my perk of the week. I'm going to enjoy that little bit of loan forgiveness and
and I know they said it's the final extension. Maybe they'll do it again, but like, let's talk about that at those interest rates.
It has been very nice not having interest on those student loan payments the last 2.5 years. It's so
nice to like be paying on them and it actually goes towards the loan and not
see the number go down.
Like we've never seen. I paid off like one of my loans and I'm like working on another. Yeah. And so it's like you actually see progress. It's pretty incredible. But
so yeah, let's hope for something with the interest next.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. But yeah, if you want to tell us about your best friend who you talk to every single night on FaceTime, about, I don't even remember what we talk about at this point. We just jibber jabber, jibber jabber, jibber jabber, jibber jabber. Which Kevin always says to me, anytime I'm texting, he's like, who are you writing a book to? And I'm like, this is 4 sentences. But like, we send like paragraphs to each other, and he's like, what the hell is that?
I mean, to men, like 4 sentences is a book. So like, I'm used to like 1-word responses.
Yep. But yeah, if you want to tell us about your best friend, if you want to talk about your job or your student loans, or please don't email us about how you're upset about the student loan thing. I don't want to know. You can just keep that to Twitter, but not at our tagline, or tag, whatever. Don't tweet it to us. Tweet it to Biden or something, because he ain't gonna fucking look at it. He doesn't know how to use Twitter. It's not him tweeting, guys. I don't mean to spoil it for you, but he's not the one tweeting.
He doesn't know how to put a damn sentence together. Okay?
He's not the one tweeting. Tweet at him, because no one's gonna look at it and no one's gonna care. Anyway, you can find us on Instagram at Caffeinated Crimes Pod, at Twitter at Caf Crimes Pod. If you're wanting to be mad about the student loans, it is at POTUS, or something. I don't remember what the actual tag is, but Facebook at Caffeinated Crimes Podcast. We are on TikTok and YouTube at Caffeinated Crimes Podcast or not. It varies from which one. You can send us an email at caffeinatedcrimespod@gmail.com. And if you feel so inclined, we mentioned that Patreon earlier that was like a fever dream. It was called Double Jeopardy Bagel with everything seasoning, because again, we just rambled on and we talked about the movie Double Jeopardy with Tommy Lee Jones and Ashley Judd, 2 American heroes. Yes. Don't really know if they're heroes, but they are in the movie world.
And a good movie that held up. So if you want to hear us discuss it,
but we also have like 20 plus bonuses too, if that is not your jam.
Yes. And you can hop on monthly Google Hangouts with us, where we can chat about whatever you want to chat about. I don't know why Courtney's laughing.
I'm laughing because if that's not your jam. So I was thinking about the jam on the Double Jeopardy bagel.
That's such a good one.
And I didn't even mean it. Oh, it is late, guys. We have got to end this. How many times have I said this? I said this like 2 weeks ago too. Like, we've got to end this episode. But please, please, please join our Patreon. You get so many benefits. It's all described right there at patreon.com/caffeinatedcrimes. If you have any questions, contact us about Patreon. Contact us at those things I said before that I started rambling. Yes. But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.